Most people will never win. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack opportunity, but because every single day, they hand control of their life to something they never trained, their emotions. One comment destroys their focus. One setback breaks their momentum. One person's opinion rewrites their entire identity. And they call it sensitivity. They call it being human. But here is the truth nobody is telling you. Your reactions are either building your life or burning it down, and there is no middle ground. This audiobook is not here to comfort you. It is here to change you. Because the moment you master the silence inside your mind, nothing outside of it will ever control you again. Let's begin. Let me ask you something, and I want you to sit with this question before you answer it. When was the last time you said the words, "I am angry"? Not, "I feel angry." Not, "I'm experiencing anger right now." But "I am angry." As if anger is not something passing through you, but something that is you. When was the last time you said, "I am depressed"? Not, "I am going through a difficult season." Not, "I am feeling the weight of something heavy." But "I am depressed." As if sadness has a permanent lease on your identity and you signed it without reading the terms. Most people say these things every single day, and they have no idea what they are doing to themselves when they do. Here is the truth. And this truth is the foundation of everything we are going to build together in this audiobook. Your emotions are not your identity. They are weather. And you are not the weather. You are the sky. The storm passes. The sky remains. But nobody taught you that. And that is not an excuse. That is a diagnosis. From the moment you were a child, you were taught to be your emotions. You cried, and someone said, "You are so sensitive." You got angry, and someone said, "You are so difficult." You felt fear, and someone said, "You are a coward." Do you understand what happened in those moments? An adult, who was never taught this either, took a temporary emotional state and pressed it into your identity like a brand. And you carried it. You carried it into school, into relationships, into the career decisions you made, into the way you respond under pressure today. You were conditioned, not by malice, but by ignorance. And now, right now, you have a choice. You can keep living inside that conditioning, or you can dismantle it. That is the key. You always had a choice. You just were never shown where it was. Here is what is actually happening in your body when you feel an emotion. A stimulus enters your environment. Your brain processes it in milliseconds. A cascade of neurochemicals floods your system, and a feeling emerges. That entire process, from stimulus to feeling, takes less than a quarter of a second. You did not choose that. Your nervous system is doing its job. It is scanning, assessing, and responding. That is not weakness. That is biology. But here is where everything changes. Between that feeling and your response, there is a gap. It may be small. It may feel invisible. But it exists. And inside that gap lives the most powerful version of you that has ever existed. That version does not react. That version observes. This is what I call the observer principle. And it is the single most important concept in this entire audiobook. The observer is the part of you that watches your emotions without becoming them. It is the part that can say, "I notice I am feeling rage right now," without the rage making any decisions. It is the part that can register fear, register pain, register humiliation, and still choose the response that serves your life instead of destroying it. The observer does not suppress your emotions. Let me be clear about that. Suppression is not the goal. Suppression is just a pressure cooker. It builds until it explodes. The observer does not lock the emotion in a box. The observer sees the emotion, names the emotion, and then governs the response to it. That is not coldness. That is mastery. The Navy SEALs understand this at a level most people never will. During Hell Week, one of the most psychologically brutal training programs ever designed, candidates do not simply face physical exhaustion. They face the complete disintegration of the story they have been telling themselves about who they are. Cold, sleep-deprived, broken down to nothing. In that state, panic is not a possibility, it is a certainty. The body screams. The mind begs to quit. And what are they trained to do? They are trained to narrate it. Not to fight it. Not to pretend it isn't happening. But to name it out loud, to themselves. I am feeling panic. My heart rate is elevated. My mind is telling me I cannot continue. The act of narration creates distance. And distance creates choice. Instructors have documented this. The candidates who survive Hell Week are not the biggest. They are not the strongest. They are the ones who learned. under the most extreme pressure imaginable, to become the observer of their own experience rather than the prisoner of it. You don't need their permission to apply that same principle to your life. You don't need to be a Navy SEAL. You don't need a program or a certificate or someone to validate your process. You need a decision, right now, that you will no longer be your emotions. You will observe them. So what does this look like in real life? It looks like this. Someone says something that hits you. A criticism, a dismissal, a betrayal. Your chest tightens. Your jaw clenches. The heat rises. And instead of becoming the heat, you name it. I am noticing anger. I am noticing the urge to retaliate. I am noticing that my ego has been activated. That naming, that simple, quiet, internal narration, pulls you out of the reaction and into the observer seat. It will not feel natural at first. Nothing worth building ever does. But every single time you do it, you are laying one more brick in the wall of your emotional sovereignty. It is not about being emotionless. It is about being the one who decides which emotions earn a response. That is the key. Now I want to give you your first real challenge. Not tomorrow. Today. Think back and be honest with yourself to the last 3 times your emotions made a decision that your logic would never have approved. 3 times. They don't have to be dramatic. Maybe you sent a message you wish you hadn't. Maybe you walked away from something you should have stayed for. Maybe you stayed for something you should have walked away from. Maybe you said something in a moment of heat that cost you a relationship, a reputation, or an opportunity. Find those 3 moments. Sit with them. Not with shame. Shame is not the goal here. With analysis. Ask the question, who was making that decision? Was it me? Or was it a feeling that I mistook for me? Because here is the truth that this entire book is built on. You are not what you feel. You are what you decide. Feelings are visitors. Some of them are loud. Some of them are convincing. Some of them will tell you that they are permanent and that they are you. They are lying. You are the one who remains after every feeling passes. You are the architecture, not the weather inside it. And the moment you truly understand that, the moment it stops being a concept and becomes a lived, practiced, daily reality, nothing outside of you will ever hold the same power over you again. You have just laid the foundation. You now know that your emotions are not your identity. They are information. You know that the observer exists inside you right now, waiting to be developed. And you know that the gap between stimulus and response is where your freedom lives. But knowing it is only the beginning. Now we have to talk about what happens in that gap, and why most people lose it before they ever use it. Because the world is designed to make you react. Immediately. Impulsively. Before you think. And the next chapter is going to show you exactly how that trap works, and exactly how to stop falling into it. I want you to think about the last time there was silence in a conversation. Not peaceful silence. Not comfortable silence between 2 people who know each other deeply. I mean the kind of silence that falls in the middle of a tense moment. A negotiation. A confrontation. A conversation where something real is at stake. What happened? Someone filled it. Almost immediately. Someone rushed in with words, explanations, justifications, offers, apologies, anything to end the discomfort of the quiet. And I want you to ask yourself honestly, was that person usually you? Because if it was, and for most people, it is, then you have been surrendering power in every high-stakes moment of your life without even knowing it. Not through weakness, not through lack of intelligence, but through one deeply conditioned, almost universal human fear. The fear of silence. We have been taught from the beginning that silence is a problem to be solved. As children, silence meant something was wrong. In classrooms, silence meant you didn't know the answer. In social settings, silence meant awkwardness, rejection, disconnection. The message was everywhere and it was consistent. Fill the quiet. Speak. Perform. Engage. Prove you are present. And so we learned to talk. Constantly. Compulsively. Not because we always had something valuable to say, but because the silence felt dangerous. That conditioning followed you into adulthood, into your relationships, into your workplace, into every room where your position, your credibility, or your outcome was on the line. And here is what that conditioning has been costing you. Every time you rush to fill silence, you reveal your hand. You show your anxiety. You expose your need for approval. You give the other person a roadmap to exactly where your pressure points are. You have a choice. Every single time silence enters a room, you have a choice. You can fill it out of fear, or you can hold it with intention. That is the key. Silence is not the absence of communication. Silence, wielded with intention, is communication. It is the most powerful form of it. The world's most effective negotiators have known this for decades. Chris Voss spent years as the FBI's lead international hostage negotiator. He has sat across from kidnappers, terrorists, and criminals whose demands carried life or death consequences. And one of the most documented tools in his entire framework, a framework now used by the world's top executives, attorneys, and dealmakers, is the deliberate, strategic use of silence. Here's how it works. When the other party makes a statement, an offer, a demand, a position, the instinct is to respond immediately, to counter, to clarify, to fill the space their words just created. Voss trained himself, and now trains others, to do the opposite. You let the silence sit. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, sometimes longer, and something remarkable happens. The other person, uncomfortable, uncertain, unable to read you, starts talking again. And this time, they are not delivering a prepared position. They are revealing their actual one. They lower their demand. They add concessions they never intended to offer. They expose the anxiety underneath the confidence they walked in with. They fill the silence. And in filling it, they hand you everything you need. This is not manipulation. This is emotional mastery applied to communication. It is not about talking more. It is about saying less with greater precision. You don't need their permission to use this. You don't need a hostage negotiation to apply it. You need the next difficult conversation you are already going to have, and the discipline to hold your ground in the quiet. Fortune 500 boardrooms operate the same way. The most studied CEOs in the world, the ones who consistently command rooms, close deals, and retain authority under pressure, share a documented communication pattern. They speak less than almost everyone around them. When they do speak, people lean in. Not because of the volume, because of the scarcity. Think about that. When someone speaks constantly, their words become noise. You stop processing them. You start waiting for them to finish. But when someone speaks rarely, deliberately, and only when they have something that matters, every word lands like a stone dropped in still water. The ripples go further. The impact is deeper. The loudest person in the room is the most afraid. Read that again. The loudest person in the room is the most afraid. The noise is not confidence. The noise is armor. It is the sound of someone trying to control an environment they do not trust themselves to sit quietly inside. They talk to manage their anxiety. They talk to prevent silence from revealing something they are not ready to face. And the quiet person? The one in the corner who speaks twice and is remembered for both times? That person is not absent. That person is operating. So what does this mean for you practically? What do you actually do with this? You start with what I call the silent baseline practice. Here is the assignment. For one full day, 24 hours, you speak only when it is necessary. Not when it is comfortable. Not when it fills the awkward space. Not when it makes someone else feel better about the silence between you. Only when it genuinely serves a purpose. This is not about being cold. It is not about punishing the people around you with your quiet. It is about recalibrating your relationship with your own voice and discovering how much of what you say every day is driven not by intention, but by the compulsive need to be heard, validated, and approved of. Because here is what you will discover on that day. You will feel the urge to speak constantly. And most of the time, when you trace that urge back to its root, it is not because you have something valuable to offer. It is because the silence makes you feel invisible. And feeling invisible makes you feel like you do not matter. That is not a communication problem. That is an identity problem. And it goes all the way back to chapter 1. You are not what you feel. You are what you decide. You have a choice, to speak from strength or from fear. The silent baseline practice teaches you, through direct experience, which one you have been doing. And once you see it clearly, you cannot unsee it. One day of chosen silence will show you more about your emotional patterns than a year of conversation ever could. You will notice who you feel compelled to impress. You will notice the moments you would normally over-explain yourself, and the realization that the explanation was never for them. It was for you. It was you trying to manage their perception of you because you had not yet built enough internal security to let their perception be their own business. That is the key. Silence is not just a communication tactic. Silence is a form of self-respect. It is the practice of trusting that you do not have to perform your value in order for it to exist. Your value does not require your constant narration. Say that again to yourself. My value does not require my constant narration. The moment you internalize that, the moment the silence stops feeling like a void you need to fill and starts feeling like ground you are choosing to stand on, everything about the way you move through the world changes. You stop seeking approval in every room you enter. You stop measuring your worth by the reaction in other people's faces. You stop bleeding out loud for an audience that was never going to stitch the wound anyway. You simply hold the space. You hold your ground. And you let the world reveal itself, while you reveal nothing. The loudest person in the room is the most afraid. And the quietest person in the room holds all the power. You now understand that silence is not absence. It is presence. The most controlled, most intentional, most powerful form of presence you can carry into any room. But silence on the outside means nothing if there is chaos on the inside. Because there are people in your life, right now, who know exactly how to reach past your composure and pull the reaction directly out of you. They know your triggers. And whether they know it consciously or not, they use them. The next chapter is about those people. And more importantly, it is about what you have been doing wrong every single time you let them in. Chapter 4. Stop bleeding in public. The high cost of emotional oversharing. I want you to think about the last time you were hurting. Really hurting. Not surface-level frustration. Real pain. Real anger. Real disappointment that sat heavy in your chest and wouldn't move. Now think about what you did with it. Did you sit with it quietly and process it alone? Did you take it to one trusted person who had earned the right to hold it with you? Or did you open the wound in front of an audience, on your phone, in a group chat, across a dinner table, on a social media post at 11 o'clock at night, and let everyone watch you bleed? Be honest. Nobody is watching you right now except you. Because for most people, and this is not a judgment, this is a pattern, the answer is the third one. The wound gets opened. The audience assembles. The validation comes in. The likes, the comments, the "I'm so sorry, you deserve better" responses flood the screen. And for a moment, just a moment, it feels like relief. But it is not relief. It is the most expensive thing you are doing to yourself. And this chapter is going to show you exactly why. Every single time you display your pain publicly, something transfers. Not metaphorically, not philosophically. Actually, measurably, permanently, power transfers from you to the room. Think about what you are communicating when you perform your struggle for an audience. You are communicating that you cannot hold it, that the weight is too heavy for you to carry privately, that you need external witnesses to validate your experience before you can process it, that without the audience, the pain has no meaning. And the world receives that communication whether you intended to send it or not. The colleague who sees your breakdown post at midnight files it away. The person you over-explained yourself to spent 20 minutes justifying a decision that required no justification, now knows that you can be moved, that your boundaries are negotiable, that if they push back, you will feel compelled to defend yourself. You have a choice. Every time the pain rises and the phone is in your hand, you have a choice. You can process it or you can perform it. That is the key. Processing heals you. Performing exposes you. And the difference between the two is not the emotion. It is the audience. It is not about being vulnerable. It is about being strategic with your vulnerability. Let me be very clear here, because this chapter is not telling you to become a closed, emotionless machine. Vulnerability, in the right context, with the right people, is one I need to correct something. Something that has been misrepresented so consistently, in so many self-help books, in so many motivational speeches, in so many conversations about emotional strength, that most people have built an entirely wrong picture of what mastery actually looks like. The word is detachment. And the moment I say it, I know what image forms in your mind. The cold person, the disconnected person, the one who doesn't care, doesn't feel, doesn't invest, who moves through life like a ghost, untouched and untouchable because nothing ever meant enough to hurt them. That is not detachment. That is damage. And I am not here to help you become damaged. Real detachment, the kind that the most effective, most resilient, most consistently excellent people on earth have built their entire operating system around, is something completely different. It is not the absence of care. It is the presence of an unbreakable decision. The decision that your peace is non-negotiable. Your progress is non-negotiable. Your purpose is non-negotiable. And that no outcome, no person, and no circumstance holds the authority to revoke any of those three things. That is not coldness. That is the highest form of emotional architecture a human being can build. Let me show you what emotional fusion looks like. Because most people are living inside it right now and calling it passion. You work towards something, a promotion, a relationship, a business, a goal that means everything to you. You pour yourself into it completely. Your identity gets wrapped around it. Your self-worth gets tied to it. Your mood in the morning is dictated by how it's going. Your ability to sleep at night depends on where it stands. And then something goes wrong. The deal falls through. The relationship shifts. The result doesn't match the effort. And when it suffers, you collapse. Not because you are weak, but because you made a critical architectural error. You fused yourself to the outcome. You are not separate from the result. You are the result. Which means when it fails, you don't experience failure. You become failure. When it's rejected, you don't experience rejection. You become rejected. The outcome is not something that happened to you. It is something that happened as you. That is what I call the victim position. And I want to be precise about this word. I am not using victim as an insult. I am using it as a description of a structural relationship between a person and their outcomes. The victim structure is this. What happens outside of me determines what happens inside of me. Full stop. And as long as that structure is in place, you will never have consistent peace. You will never have reliable confidence. You will never have the kind of sustained momentum that transforms a life, because your entire emotional state is being outsourced to circumstances you cannot fully control. You have a choice. You can be a victim of your outcomes, or you can become the architect of your response to them. That is the key. Kobe Bryant won 5 NBA championships. He is considered by many to be among the greatest competitors in the history of professional sport. And the thing that separated him, the thing his teammates, his coaches, and his opponents consistently identified as the core of his dominance, was not his talent. It was his relationship with losing. Here is what that relationship looked like. After a loss, a real loss, a painful one, a game that mattered, Kobe did not pretend it didn't hurt. He was not performing stoicism in the locker room. He sat in it. He felt the full weight of it. He let the devastation be real. And then, within 24 hours, it was gone. Not suppressed, not buried, processed and released. He extracted the information, what went wrong, what to correct, what to build, and he left the emotional wreckage behind. He walked into the next practice carrying the lesson and nothing else. His identity was never the scoreboard. His identity was the work. He gave everything to the process. He gave nothing to the outcome. That phrase, give everything to the process, give nothing to the outcome, is not a motivational slogan. It is a structural description of how elite performers maintain emotional consistency across the inevitable fluctuations of any long-term pursuit. The outcome fluctuates. It always will. Markets rise and fall. People come and go. Circumstances shift without warning or fairness. If your emotional foundation is built on the outcome, you will spend your entire life being rebuilt and destroyed on a cycle you cannot stop. But the process? The process is yours. The effort is yours. The commitment to showing up, doing the work, and bringing everything you have to this moment, regardless of what the last moment produced. That is territory no external force can occupy. It is not about the result. It is about the discipline of the process. That is the key. So here is what this looks like practically. Here is what you actually do. I want to introduce you to what I call the detachment declaration. It is a mental script, a brief, deliberate, internal statement that you deliver to yourself before any high-stakes situation. Before the meeting, before the conversation, before the performance, before the moment where the outcome matters. It goes like this. I am going to give everything I have to this moment. My preparation, my focus, my full presence. I commit completely to the effort, and I release completely the result. Whatever happens on the other side of this is information, not identity. My value is not determined by this outcome. My peace is not contingent on this outcome. I am the architect. I build. I release. I continue. Read that again. Slowly this time. That declaration does something specific. It draws a clean line between your effort, which you control, and your outcome, which you influence but do not control. It anchors your identity in the one territory that can never be taken from you, the quality of your commitment. You don't need their permission to adopt this. You don't need favorable circumstances. You don't need the outcome to cooperate. You need to say those words, out loud, internally, written in a journal, whatever form works for you, and mean them. And then go perform. Here is what changes when you build this practice consistently. Your confidence stops being weather-dependent. Right now, for most people, confidence arrives when things are going well and disappears when they are not. That is not confidence. That is a mood. Real confidence is the knowledge, built through repeated experience, that you can bring your best regardless of conditions, that you are not a fair-weather performer, that you are the same person in the preparation that you are in the result. That kind of confidence cannot be given to you, and it cannot be taken from you, because it is not based on what happened. It is based on who you decided to be. Not everyone deserves a seat at the table of your identity, and that includes your outcomes. They are guests. They are temporary. They will come and they will go. You are the permanent resident of your own life, and it is time you started acting like it. Give everything to the process. Give nothing to the outcome. You are not what happened to you. You are not the deal that fell through, the relationship that ended, the goal that didn't arrive on schedule. You are the person who kept building anyway. The person who extracted the lesson and left the wreckage. The person who decided, with full, conscious, repeated intention, that their peace was non-negotiable. That is the architect. That is who you are becoming. You now understand that detachment is not distance from life. It is dominance over your response to it. You care deeply. You work completely. And you release the outcome without releasing your identity. But here is what you will discover as you build this practice. There are people around you who will test it. Consistently. People whose behavior reaches past your composure and tries to pull a reaction out of you directly. And most of the time, without even realizing it, you have been handing it to them. The next chapter is going to change that. Chapter 6. The people who disturb your peace are your greatest teachers. Stop wasting the lesson. There is someone in your life right now who gets to you. You know exactly who I am talking about. I did not even finish the sentence, and a face appeared in your mind. Maybe it is a coworker who dismisses your ideas in meetings with a tone that makes your jaw tighten. Maybe it is a parent whose single phone call can unravel 3 days of carefully built composure. Maybe it is a friend, or someone you used to call a friend, whose behavior triggered a reaction in you so sharp, so immediate, so total, that you lost yourself completely in it. You have probably spent a significant amount of time thinking about that person, analyzing them, building the case against them, rehearsing what you should have said, planning what you will say next time, running the scenario on a loop until it becomes the background noise of your entire day. And I want to tell you something about that person that is going to be deeply uncomfortable to hear. They are not your enemy. They are not your problem. They are not the obstacle standing between you and your peace. They are your teacher, and you have been failing the class. Here is the truth that this chapter is built on, and I want you to sit with it rather than immediately defend against it. Every person who triggers an uncontrolled emotional response in you is holding a mirror, not a weapon, a mirror. The reaction they produce in you is not about them. It was never about them. It is a precise, accurate, uncomfortable reflection of something unresolved that lives inside you. An old wound that never fully closed. A belief about yourself that you have never examined. A fear that you have been managing instead of confronting. Think about it this way. 2 people can receive the exact same dismissive comment from the exact same person in the exact same room. One of them shrugs and moves forward. The other one is devastated for 3 days. Same comment. Same delivery. Same room. Completely different reactions. The comment did not do that. The comment was neutral information. What the comment hit, in the person who was devastated, was a belief that was already there, already tender, already waiting to be confirmed. I am not respected. I am not enough. I do not belong here. My voice does not matter. The other person does not carry that belief. So the comment passes through them without friction. This is not about intelligence. This is not about sensitivity being a flaw. It is about understanding that your triggers are a map, and most people spend their entire lives trying to disable the map instead of reading it. You have a choice. You can keep treating the people who disturb your peace as enemies to be managed. Or you can start treating them as diagnostics, precise instruments pointing directly at the work that is still waiting to be done. That is the key. There is a documented phenomenon in psychology called emotional contagion. Here is what it means in plain language. Human beings are neurologically wired to synchronize with the emotional states of the people around them. Your nervous system, without your conscious awareness or permission, reads the energy in a room and begins to mirror it. Someone walks in anxious. and you start feeling vaguely unsettled without knowing why. Someone brings hostility into a conversation, and your body registers it as threat before your mind has processed a single word they said. This is not weakness. This is ancient biology. It kept your ancestors alive by making them sensitive to danger signals in their environment. But in the modern world, in your office, in your relationships, in your family, this same mechanism becomes a liability if you never learn to govern it. Because what it means practically is this. If you are a highly reactive person, you are unconsciously outsourcing your emotional state to whoever you encountered last. Your peace is not yours. It belongs to the room. It belongs to the last person who walked through your door. It belongs to the last notification on your phone. It belongs to the energy of whoever sat across from you at lunch. You are not living from the inside out. You are living from the outside in. And everything, your mood, your confidence, your capacity to think clearly and act decisively, is being determined by an environment you cannot fully control. If they can move you, they control you. Read that again. If they can move you, they control you. Not because they are powerful, but because you have not yet built the internal structure that keeps you rooted when the external world shakes. It is not about them. It is about the work you have not done yet. So here is the exercise. And I want you to take this seriously because it will show you more about yourself than almost anything else I offer in this audiobook. I call it trigger mapping. Take the people and situations in your life that reliably, not occasionally, but reliably, produce a strong emotional reaction in you. Write them down. One column, the trigger, the person, the situation, the type of comment, the specific dynamic. Second column, the reaction. What happens in your body? What emotion arrives? How intense it is on a scale of 1 to 10. Now the third column, and this is the one that changes everything. Ask yourself, underneath this reaction, what is the belief? Not what did they do wrong? Not why are they difficult? What is the belief inside me that this situation confirms? Because every trigger has a belief underneath it. Every single one. The coworker who dismisses you in meetings triggers the belief that your voice doesn't matter. The parent whose approval never arrives triggers the belief that you are fundamentally not enough. The friend who betrayed you triggers the belief that closeness always ends in abandonment. These beliefs were formed long before these people entered your life. These people did not create the wound. They found it, and they pressed on it. And your nervous system responded the way it was always going to respond to pressure on an unhealed wound, with pain. You don't need their permission to heal it. The work does not require their participation. It does not require their apology. It does not require them to change, to understand, or to acknowledge what they did. The work is yours. The healing is yours. And it begins the moment you stop pointing at them and start reading the map they handed you. Now I want to give you the single most important practical tool in this chapter. I call it the psychological perimeter. Here's how it works. The moment you feel a strong emotional reaction beginning, the chest tightening, the jaw clenching, the heat rising, before you say anything, before you do anything, you pause. 1 breath, 2 seconds, and you ask yourself one question. Is this response mine, or did I just inherit it from someone else? That question does something structural. It pulls you out of the automatic reaction loop and places you back in the observer's seat. It forces a moment of authorship. It reminds you that you are not a passive receiver of other people's energy. You are a conscious being with the capacity to choose what enters your inner world and what does not. Some reactions will be yours. Legitimate, grounded, appropriate responses to real situations. Those deserve expression, measured, intentional, purposeful expression. But many reactions, far more than you currently realize, are inherited. They are emotional weather that blew in from someone else's storm. They are the residue of someone else's bad day, someone else's unresolved wounds, someone else's need to transfer their inner chaos to the nearest available person. And you have been accepting the transfer without questioning the delivery. That stops now. You have a choice. Every single time. Between absorption and observation. Between inheriting someone else's chaos and standing firmly inside your own clarity. Not everyone deserves access to your nervous system. Not everyone's energy deserves a permanent residence in your mind. You are allowed. You are required. If peace is genuinely the goal, to build a perimeter, to decide what crosses the threshold and what does not. If they can move you, they control you, and you are done being controlled. The psychological perimeter is not a wall that keeps people out. It is a filter that keeps you intact. It is the daily, practiced, non-negotiable discipline of asking, before every reaction, whether what you are about to express is coming from your highest self or your most unhealed one. That question, asked consistently, will transform every difficult relationship in your life. Not because the other people will change, but because you will. And when you change, when you stop being reactive, when you stop being movable, when you stop handing your piece to anyone who knows which button to press, the dynamic shifts completely. You cannot control what people bring into the room, but you can control what they find when they get there. You now understand that your triggers are teachers, not threats. You have the trigger map. You have the psychological perimeter. You have the one question that separates reaction from response. But all of this, the observer, the silence, the detachment, the perimeter, requires one foundational quality that most people never deliberately build. It requires the capacity to endure discomfort without escaping it. Because the version of you that never gets moved, that version was not born. It was built, brick by brick, through voluntary hardship and chosen difficulty and the repeated, disciplined decision to stay when every emotion said run. The next chapter is about how you build that. Chapter 7. Build the wall. How to develop mental toughness that cannot be negotiated with. I want you to think about someone you know, or someone you have observed from a distance, who seems unshakable. You know the type. The person who receives bad news and processes it without falling apart in public. The person who gets knocked down by circumstances that would devastate most people and somehow returns to the work within days. The person who operates under pressure with a quality of focus and composure that makes everyone around them seem fragile by comparison. And I want you to be honest about the story you have been telling yourself about that person. Because for most people, the story goes something like this. They are just built differently. They were born with something extra. A thicker skin, a stronger nerve, a psychological constitution that most of us simply were not issued at birth. They are the exception. And you, by implication, are the rule. That story is a lie. And it is the most expensive lie you will ever tell yourself. Because here is what is actually true about every person you have ever admired for their mental toughness, their composure under fire, their ability to absorb pressure without breaking. They built it. Deliberately. Repeatedly. Brick by brick. Over time. Through the unglamorous, undocumented, mostly invisible practice of choosing discomfort when every emotion they possessed was screaming at them to choose escape. They are not wired differently. They are trained differently. And training, unlike genetics, is available to everyone. You have a choice. Right now, you can keep believing that toughness is a trait you either have or you don't. Or you can accept the far more demanding and far more liberating truth that it is a construction project. And you are the only one who can build it. That is the key. Let me tell you what mental toughness actually is at its core. It is not the absence of fear. It is not the absence of doubt, pain, exhaustion, or the desire to quit. Every person who has ever demonstrated genuine mental toughness has felt all of those things, fully, deeply, and repeatedly. Mental toughness is the practiced capacity to feel all of those things and continue anyway. Not because the discomfort disappeared. Not because conditions became favorable. Not because someone arrived to make it easier. But because somewhere in the architecture of their daily practice, they built a relationship with discomfort that the average person never builds. They stopped treating discomfort as a signal to retreat. They started treating it as a signal that the construction was working. Think about what happens to a muscle under physical stress. The stress does not strengthen the muscle while it is happening. It tears the fiber. It creates micro damage. It produces pain. The strength comes afterward, in the recovery, in the rebuilding, in the body's adaptive response to the demand that was placed on it. Mental toughness works the same way. Every time you sit inside discomfort without escaping it, you are creating micro damage to the part of you that needs ease in order to function. And in the rebuilding, that part of you becomes less fragile, less reactive, less dependent on favorable conditions to perform. But only if you actually do it. Only if you stop waiting for discomfort to find you and start deliberately choosing it. It is not about the pain. It is about what the pain is building. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome. At the height of his power, he commanded the largest empire the ancient world had ever seen. He had access to every comfort, every luxury, every form of ease that human civilization could produce in the 2nd century. He could have lived in complete softness and no one would have questioned it. Instead, he woke up every morning and interrogated himself. The document we now call Meditations was never written for publication. It was never intended for an audience. It was a private journal, a daily, relentless practice of self-examination in which one of the most powerful men in human history held himself accountable to a standard of character that the world around him never demanded. He wrote about his own laziness, his own impulses, his own desire to sleep longer, complain more, react to the provocations of people who frustrated him. He did not write about these things to perform vulnerability. He wrote about them to see them clearly, because he understood that the moment you stop examining your weaknesses honestly is the moment they begin to govern you invisibly. He chose the discomfort of self-confrontation every single morning, not because his empire required it, because he understood something that most people never do. Comfort is the slowest form of destruction. Say that phrase out loud right now. Comfort is the slowest form of destruction. It does not look like destruction. That is what makes it so dangerous. It looks like rest. It looks like reward. It looks like you have finally earned the right to stop pushing. And all the while, quietly, incrementally, the capacity you built through struggle begins to erode, because capacity, like muscle, requires consistent demand in order to maintain itself. Marcus Aurelius knew this in the 2nd century. The Navy SEALs codified it in their training protocols. Every elite performer who has ever sustained excellence over a long career built their practice around the same non-negotiable principle. You do not get to keep what you stop working for. Not in the body, not in the mind, and not in the emotional resilience that this entire audiobook is asking you to build. So here is the structure. Here is what you are actually going to do. I call it the 30-day mental wall challenge. And I want to be precise about what it is and what it is not. It is not punishment. It is not suffering for the sake of suffering. It is not a test of how much pain you can absorb before you break. It is an investment. The single most reliable investment in emotional immunity that any human being can make. And it costs nothing except the comfort you have been spending too freely for too long. Here is the framework. For 30 days, you identify one deliberate act of chosen discomfort per day. You start small. Day 1 might be waking up 30 minutes earlier than your body wants to. Day 2 might be having the difficult conversation you have been postponing for 3 weeks. Day 3 might be working through the hour when your energy dips and every instinct says to stop. You escalate gradually. By week 2, the discomfort is larger. The cold exposure is longer. The silence is more sustained. The difficult task is more demanding. By week 4, you are doing things that the version of you who started this chapter would have categorized as impossible. And here is what happens, not metaphorically, but neurologically, over those 30 days. Your threshold shifts. The things that used to activate your stress response stop activating it at the same intensity. The situations that used to feel intolerable become manageable. The discomfort that used to make you retreat becomes familiar terrain. And familiar terrain cannot frighten you the way unknown territory can. You are not becoming numb. You are becoming capable. There is a profound difference. You don't need their permission to start this. You do not need ideal conditions. You do not need someone to design the program for you or validate your progress or tell you that you are doing it right. You need to pick one uncomfortable thing today, not tomorrow, today, and choose it instead of the alternative. That is the first brick. Every brick matters. That is something people miss when they look at the finished wall and feel intimidated by its height. They forget that it was built one brick at a time, one day at a time, one chosen discomfort at a time, by a person who was not special, not uniquely gifted, not exempted from the desire to quit, just committed, daily, to the construction. Comfort is the slowest form of destruction, and discipline, chosen, practiced, voluntary discipline, is the only architecture that holds against everything life is eventually going to send in your direction. The wall you build in the quiet seasons is the wall that protects you in the storm, and the storm is always coming. The question is never whether you will be tested. The question is whether you will have built something worth testing when the moment arrives. Start building today. You now have the blueprint for mental toughness. You understand that it is not a trait, it is a practice. You have the voluntary hardship protocol. You have the 30-day mental wall challenge. You have the understanding that comfort, left unchecked, is not your reward. It is your erosion. But here is what happens as you build this wall. As you become harder to move, harder to shake, harder to break, something else begins to surface. Something subtler. Something that disguises itself as principle and righteousness and self-respect. Your ego. And your ego, left unexamined, will quietly undo everything this wall was built to protect. The next chapter is about that. Chapter 8. Ego is the enemy of clarity. How pride disguises itself as principle. I want you to think about the last time you held your ground in a conflict. Not backed down. Not compromised. Held your ground completely. Refused to move. Refused to concede. Refused to admit that the other person had a point, or that your position had a flaw, or that the situation was more complex than the story you had built around it. And I want you to ask yourself, honestly, with no audience and no need to defend the answer, what were you actually protecting in that moment? Were you protecting your values? A genuine principle that mattered to you independent of who was watching and whether you won? Or were you protecting your image? The version of yourself that does not lose arguments, does not admit error, does not give anyone the satisfaction of being right at your expense? Because those two things feel identical from the inside. That is the problem. That is the trap. The ego is not a loud, obvious force that announces itself as pride and vanity and insecurity. The ego is a sophisticated architect. It takes your wounded pride, raw, reactive, desperate to avoid humiliation, and it dresses it in the language of principle, of righteousness, of self-respect. And suddenly, the most self-destructive position you could possibly hold feels not only justified, it feels required. That is the most dangerous emotional state a human being can occupy. Not grief, not fear, not anger in its raw form, but righteous ego, the absolute conviction that your reaction is not only understandable, but morally necessary. Because at least with grief, you know you are in pain. At least with fear, you know you are afraid. But with righteous ego, you are certain you are right. And certainty closes every door that growth requires to stay open. Here is what makes the ego uniquely destructive compared to every other emotional force this audiobook has addressed. Every other emotional reaction we have discussed, the impulsive response, the public bleeding, the fused identity, the inherited trigger, all of these feel like weakness when you examine them honestly. You know, on some level, that you are reacting from a place that does not serve you. The discomfort of that knowledge creates the opening for change. But the ego reaction does not feel like weakness. It feels like strength. It feels like dignity. It feels like the one thing standing between you and complete surrender to someone who wronged you. And that feeling, that absolute, self-confirming, emotionally airtight feeling of being in the right, is precisely what makes it so capable of destroying everything you have built. Think about Kodak. In the 1970s, Kodak's own engineers developed the first digital camera. The technology that would eventually make film photography obsolete was invented inside Kodak's own walls. And the leadership, presented with this invention, presented with a clear picture of where the industry was heading, chose to suppress it. Not because they lacked intelligence, not because they lacked resources, but because acknowledging the technology meant acknowledging that everything they had built, everything they believed, everything they had staked their identity and their legacy on, was about to become irrelevant. The ego said, "We are the film industry. We define this space. We are not going to be the ones who dismantle it." And Kodak filed for bankruptcy in 2012. Blockbuster had the opportunity to purchase Netflix in the year 2000 for $50 million. The CEO passed. The reasoning was rooted not in sound financial analysis, but in the preservation of a narrative. The belief that their model was correct, that their dominance was permanent, that adapting would mean admitting they had been wrong about the direction of their industry. The ego won the argument. Blockbuster lost the war. These are not cautionary tales about business strategy. They are precise, documented illustrations of what happens when the need to protect an identity overrides the capacity to see clearly. The ego wins the argument and loses the war. Every time. Without exception. The terrain changes. The ego insists the map is still correct. And the gap between the map and the terrain is where everything you worked for disappears. So how do you see it in yourself? How do you catch the ego before it costs you something you cannot recover? You use what I call the ego audit framework. 3 questions. Direct, uncomfortable, non-negotiable. You ask them in order. And you answer them honestly. Not the answer that makes you look good, but the answer that is actually true. Question 1. Am I protecting my values or my image? Values are external to ego. They exist independent of whether anyone is watching, whether you win the exchange, whether the other person ever acknowledges you were right. If the principle you are defending would matter to you equally in private, with no audience, no scorecard, no social consequence, it is likely a genuine value. But if the position only feels important because someone is watching, because backing down would look weak, because conceding would give the other person something you cannot bear for them to have, that is image. That is ego dressed as principle, and it deserves to be recognized for what it is. Question 2. Am I seeking justice or revenge? Justice is proportionate. Justice is interested in resolution. Justice can accept an outcome where both parties move forward with clarity, even if that outcome requires you to acknowledge your own contribution to the problem. Revenge needs the other person to suffer. Revenge is not satisfied by resolution. It is satisfied only by the confirmation that you were right, and they were wrong, and they know it, and felt it. Revenge has no interest in moving forward because moving forward means the wound closes, and the wound is what keeps the story alive. If your position requires the other person's humiliation in order to feel complete, you are not seeking justice. You are seeking revenge. And revenge has never once in the history of human conflict produced peace. Question 3. Am I standing for truth or refusing to be wrong? There is a version of conviction that is genuine, rooted in evidence, open to counter-evidence, willing to update when the facts change. That version serves you. And then there is the version that looks identical from the outside but operates from a completely different engine. The refusal to be wrong. Not because the position is correct, but because being wrong feels like annihilation. Like if you admit error here, the entire structure of who you are will collapse. That is the key. It is not about being right. It is about the fear of what being wrong means about you. And until you separate those two things, until you can be wrong about a position without being destroyed as a person, the ego will keep making decisions on your behalf that your best self would never approve. So here is your practice. And I want you to take this one seriously because it requires something the previous exercises did not require. It requires you to act before you feel ready. I call it the ego surrender practice. Right now, not after this audiobook ends, not when conditions feel right. I want you to identify one situation in your current life where you are holding a position primarily to avoid admitting error. One relationship where the standoff has gone on longer than it should because neither person will move first, and you know, if you are honest, that you could move first. One decision you have been defending publicly that you privately know was wrong. One conversation you have been avoiding because having it would require you to say two words that the ego treats as the most dangerous words in the language. I was wrong. I want you to identify that situation. Write it down. Name it specifically. And then I want you to make the deliberate, documented, conscious decision to release it. Not because the other person deserves it. Not because the situation requires it. Not because anyone will see you do it or reward you for the maturity it represents. But because you deserve the freedom that lives on the other side of it. You have a choice. You can keep holding the position. You can keep winning the argument. You can keep the ego satisfied and the narrative intact. And you can keep losing the war. Or you can put the position down. You can choose clarity over being right. You can choose forward motion over the preservation of a story that was never serving you anyway. The ego wins the argument and loses the war. You have been watching that happen in your own life for longer than you want to admit. It ends when you decide it ends. You don't need their permission. You don't need the other person to concede first. You don't need the situation to resolve itself on your terms before you are willing to release your grip on it. You need the decision, right now, that your peace, your progress, and your clarity matter more than being right. That is not defeat. That is the highest expression of self-mastery available to you. That is the key. You now understand that the most dangerous reactions are not the ones that feel like weakness. They are the ones that feel like righteousness. You have the ego audit. You have the 3 questions. You have the ego surrender practice. And you have the truth that the ego, left unexamined, will sacrifice everything you value on the altar of being right. But here is what happens when you master this. When you stop letting the ego make decisions. When you choose clarity over pride and forward motion over narrative preservation. You begin to operate on a completely different timeline than the people around you. You stop playing the short game. You start playing the only game that has ever produced lasting results. The next chapter is about that game. Chapter 9. The Long Game. Why emotionally controlled people always win in the end. That you said. You are continuing your work as an expert ghostwriter for a 1 to 2 hour YouTube audiobook. I want you to think about two people. They are the same age. They work in the same environment. They face the same pressures, the same provocations, the same difficult personalities, the same unfair circumstances that every workplace, every relationship, every competitive arena produces without apology. The first person reacts. Not always dramatically, not always visibly, but consistently. When they are dismissed, they push back immediately. When they are overlooked, they make their frustration known. When someone takes credit for their work, they confront it publicly. When a decision goes against them, they campaign against it loudly. They are not a bad person. They are not unintelligent. They are simply someone who has never learned to play anything other than the short game. The second person watches. They absorb. They process. When dismissed, they note it and continue working. When overlooked, they let the work speak without editorializing. When provoked, they choose silence over satisfaction. They are not passive. They are not weak. They are not indifferent to outcomes. They are simply operating on a timeline that the first person cannot see. 5 years later, look at the difference. The first person is known. Known for their reactions. Known as someone who is difficult to manage under pressure. Known as someone whose emotions make them unpredictable. They may be talented. They are probably right about most of what they pushed back against. But the emotional residue of 5 years of short game decisions has accumulated into a reputation that quietly closes doors before they ever open. The second person is trusted. Not because they never felt what the first person felt. Not because the provocations landed differently. But because 5 years of chosen restraint, chosen silence, chosen long game thinking has built something that no resume captures and no title conveys. Credibility. Composure. The kind of trust that only time and consistency can construct. And here is the economic truth at the center of this chapter. Every reaction you don't make is a deposit. Every silence you hold is a deposit. Every impulse you override. Every short-term satisfaction you decline in favor of long-term positioning. Deposit, deposit, deposit. Into an account that accumulates compound interest at a rate that the reactive person is not even aware exists. Emotional control is not a virtue. It is a compound interest machine. And the returns it generates, in trust, in credibility, in strategic advantage, in the quality of opportunity that finds you over time, are simply not available to the person who keeps spending their capital on the satisfaction of being right in the moment. You have a choice. Every single time. Between the withdrawal and the deposit. Between the reaction that feels good now and the restraint that pays dividends for years. That is the key. Warren Buffett is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. He is the most studied long-term investor in the history of financial markets. And the principle that has guided not just his financial decisions, but his entire operating philosophy, the filter through which he evaluates every significant choice, is disarmingly simple. Before any major decision, he asks himself one question. Would I be comfortable if this appeared on the front page of a newspaper tomorrow? Read that question carefully, because it is not primarily a financial question. It is not even primarily an ethical question. It is an emotional governance question. It is asking, if everything private about this decision became immediately public, the reasoning, the feeling behind it, the impulse it emerged from, would I be able to stand behind it completely? Not because it was perfect, but because it was made from my clearest, most considered, most long-game self rather than from the reactive, ego-driven, short-term emotion of the moment. That question has kept one of the most powerful financial minds in human history anchored to the long game for decades. Not because Buffett doesn't feel the short-term pull. Not because he is immune to the temptation of the immediate. But because he built a filter, a deliberate, practiced, non-negotiable filter, between the impulse and the action. That filter is available to you. Right now. In every conversation, every conflict, every moment where the reactive option feels compelling and the long game option feels like sacrifice. Ask the question. Not his exact words. Find your version of it. How will this read in 10 years? Is this the decision of my best self or my most reactive self? Am I spending capital or building it? I call this the decade lens principle. And it is the single most clarifying practice I can offer you for every emotional decision you will face from this point forward. Stop evaluating your reactions through the lens of how they feel today. Start evaluating them through the lens of how they will read in 10 years. Because 10 years from now, the satisfaction of the reaction you made today will be completely gone. You will not remember the feeling. But the consequences, the relationship that fractured, the reputation that shifted, the door that quietly closed, those will still be present, still shaping the terrain of your life in ways you cannot fully trace back to their origin. It is not about suppressing how you feel. It is about governing when and how those feelings become actions. That is the key. Now I want to introduce you to a practice that will make everything in this chapter concrete and visible. Because the long game has one significant psychological challenge that the short game does not have. You cannot see it working in real time. When you react, the feedback is immediate. The confrontation happens. The emotion releases. The situation resolves, messily, expensively, but quickly. There is a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the brain, which is wired for immediate feedback loops, registers the completion and calls it resolution. But when you choose restraint, when you hold the silence, override the impulse, make the long game deposit instead of the short-term withdrawal, nothing visible happens. The room continues. The situation continues. The person who provoked you continues, apparently unaffected by your composure. And the brain, searching for the feedback loop, finding no immediate resolution, begins to whisper that the restraint was not strength, that it was weakness, that you lost the exchange by not engaging it. That whisper is a lie, but it is a convincing one. And without a system for tracking what is actually being built, most people eventually stop believing that the quiet deposits are accumulating into anything real. That is why you need the silent scoreboard. Here is what it is. A private record, a journal, a note in your phone, a simple document, where you track every time you successfully override an emotional reaction. Every time you held the silence when you wanted to fill it. Every time you chose the long game response over the short game satisfaction. Every time you made the deposit instead of the withdrawal. You write it down. Briefly. The situation, the impulse, the choice you made instead. And over days and weeks, something remarkable happens. You begin to see the accumulation. You begin to have visible, documented, irrefutable evidence that the controlled mind is not losing ground by staying quiet. It is gaining territory, brick by brick, deposit by deposit, in a compound account that the reactive world around you cannot even see, let alone access. Patience is not waiting. Patience is working while others are reacting. Say that again. Patience is not waiting. Patience is working while others are reacting. The reactive person is not more active than you. They are less strategic. They are spending energy on short-cycle feedback loops that produce noise and cost capital. You are investing that same energy into long-cycle returns that most people do not have the discipline to wait for. You don't need their permission to play the long game. You do not need the people around you to understand your strategy. You do not need immediate validation that your restraint is working. The silent scoreboard is your validation. The compounding record of every deposit you made when the withdrawal was available. Here is what the long game produces that the short game never can. It produces a version of you that people trust without being able to articulate exactly why. They just know, through repeated observation, through the accumulated evidence of watching you respond to pressure with consistency, that you are someone who can be counted on when conditions are difficult, that your word means something because your word has never been hostage to your mood, that your judgment can be relied on because your judgment has never been hijacked by your ego. That reputation, built silently, slowly, through 10,000 small choices that nobody witnessed individually, but everyone experienced cumulatively, is worth more than any single confrontation you could have won, any argument you could have dominated, any short-term battle you could have taken and claimed as victory. The reactive person wins moments. The emotionally controlled person wins decades. And decades are what your life is made of. Every chapter in this audiobook has been a deposit. The observer principle, the 3-second rule, the silence, the detachment, the psychological perimeter, the mental wall, the ego audit, each one a brick, each one a deposit into the compound account of who you are becoming. You are not waiting. You are building. Right now, in the decision to keep listening, in the commitment to apply what you have learned, you are building. and what you are building is almost complete. There is one chapter remaining, and it brings everything together, not as a summary, but as an arrival. A full realization of what the silent mind actually is, what it actually means, and who you actually become when you choose to inhabit it permanently. Because the silent mind is not the destination. It is not a finished product you arrive at and then maintain effortlessly. It is a daily, chosen, practiced state of being, the freest state available to a human being who has decided, with full conviction, that nothing outside of them will ever govern what happens inside. Chapter 10. The silent mind is not the empty mind. It is the free one. We started this audiobook with a question. Not a gentle question. Not a comfortable one. A question designed to land somewhere deep and stay there. When was the last time your reaction cost you something you cannot get back? You have been sitting with that question, consciously or not, through every chapter of this journey. Through the observer principle and the reaction trap. Through the discipline of silence and the courage of detachment. Through trigger maps and psychological perimeters and mental walls and ego audits and the quiet, compounding mathematics of the long game. And now we are here. The final chapter. And I want to begin it by telling you something that I need you to hear clearly. Not as motivation, not as a closing flourish, but as a precise statement of fact. You are not the same person who pressed play at the beginning of this audiobook. Not because the words changed you automatically. Words alone change nothing. But because somewhere in these chapters, something shifted in how you see yourself in relation to your emotions. And that shift, however small it feels right now, is the most important thing that has happened to you in a long time. Because you cannot unsee what you now see. You cannot go back to believing that your reactions are simply who you are. You cannot return to the unconscious life, the life where emotions make decisions, and you discover the consequences afterward and call it fate. That door is closed. And everything in front of you is a choice. I need to correct one final misunderstanding before this audiobook ends. Because it is the misunderstanding that has followed us from the very first chapter, and it deserves a direct, permanent answer. The silent mind is not the empty mind. It is not the cold mind. It is not the disconnected mind. It is not the mind of someone who has traded their humanity for composure, their depth for control, their capacity to feel for the appearance of invulnerability. If that is what you thought this journey was asking of you, become less human, feel less deeply, care less completely, then I have not been clear enough. So let me be clear now, one final time, with everything I have. You were never being asked to become a robot. You were being asked to become the architect of your own inner world. There is a profound difference between those two things. A robot does not feel. An architect feels everything, and then decides with intention what to build with what they feel. A robot is empty. An architect is full of emotion, full of depth, full of the complete, unfiltered human experience, and chooses, with discipline and with practice, how that fullness gets expressed in the world. That is what the silent mind is. Not absence, presence. The most intentional, most grounded, most sovereign form of presence a human being can inhabit. A person so rooted in their own clarity that nothing outside them has the leverage to move them off course without their conscious permission. Read that again. Nothing outside them has the leverage to move them without their conscious permission. Not the difficult coworker. Not the dismissive parent. Not the betraying friend. Not the market that turned, the plan that failed, the outcome that didn't arrive on schedule. None of it moves you. Not because you don't feel it, but because you have built something inside that does not require the outside world to behave in order to remain intact. That is freedom. Real freedom. The only kind that cannot be taken from you. Now I want to bring everything together. Because the 10 disciplines in this audiobook are not a menu. They are not a collection of separate tools that you pick from based on the situation. They are a single, integrated operating system, and I want you to see how they connect. It begins with the observer principle. The foundational understanding that you are not your emotions. You are the one watching them. This is the ground everything else is built on. Without it, none of the other disciplines have a foundation to stand on. From the observer comes the capacity for the 3-second rule, the pause between stimulus and response where your freedom lives. The observer creates the gap. The gap creates the choice. From that choice comes the discipline of silence. The understanding that not every reaction deserves expression, that the quietest person in the room holds the most power, and that your voice carries more weight when it is not constantly filling every available space. Silence requires detachment, the architect's relationship with outcomes. Give everything to the process. Give nothing to the result. Care completely. Cling to nothing. Detachment is deepened by trigger mapping, the honest, uncomfortable practice of using the people who disturb your peace as precise diagnostics for the work that is still unfinished inside you. If they can move you, they control you. The map shows you where the work remains. The work requires voluntary hardship, the 30-day mental wall, the deliberate daily choice of discomfort over ease, the understanding that comfort is the slowest form of destruction and that the wall you build in the quiet seasons is the wall that holds in the storm. The wall must be protected from ego, the most sophisticated saboteur in your entire inner landscape. The one that dresses wounded pride as principle and calls self-destruction righteousness. The ego audit keeps the wall honest. The ego surrender practice keeps it clean. And all of it, every brick, every discipline, every deposit, compounds through the decade lens and the silent scoreboard into the long game. The only game that produces the kind of results that endure. This is not 10 things. This is one thing. A decision, made daily, reinforced through practice, deepened through time, that your inner world belongs to you. That you are the governor of what happens inside you. That nothing outside of you holds authority over your peace without your conscious invitation. That is the operating system. And it runs on one fuel, the daily, invisible, unrelenting practice of choosing response over reaction. Abraham Lincoln wrote letters he never sent rather than unleash his anger on people who needed his leadership. Kobe Bryant sat in the devastation of a loss, extracted the lesson, and walked into the next practice carrying nothing but the information. Marcus Aurelius, ruler of the most powerful empire on earth, woke up every morning and interrogated his own character before he asked anything of anyone else. Warren Buffett built a filter between his impulses and his actions and ran every major decision through it for decades. None of these men were born without ego. None of them were immune to anger, to pride, to the pull of the immediate and the reactive. None of them were the finished product at the beginning. They were practitioners. Daily, committed, unspectacular practitioners of the same core discipline, choosing, one moment at a time, who they were going to be in response to what the world sent them. That is the common thread. Not genius. Not circumstance. Not luck or talent or an unusual tolerance for pain. The daily, invisible, unrelenting practice of choosing response over reaction. That practice is available to you. Right now. Not after you have healed everything. Not after conditions improve. Not after the people in your life become easier to manage or the circumstances become more favorable or you feel ready in some way that you currently do not. Now, as you are, with everything unresolved and everything uncertain and every old pattern still present and waiting to be activated. You don't need their permission. You don't need ideal conditions. You don't need a sign or a signal or someone to tell you that you are ready. You need the decision. One more time. Right now. So I want to leave you with this. The version of you that never loses composure in the moments that matter most, that version exists. The version that never bleeds in public, never hands power to people who haven't earned it, never lets a temporary feeling make a permanent decision. That version is not a fantasy. It is not a distant possibility reserved for people with different circumstances or different histories or different levels of damage to overcome. That version is the one that has been listening to this entire audiobook. That version has been here the whole time, underneath the conditioning, underneath the reactive patterns, underneath the habits that were formed before you had the knowledge or the language or the framework to choose differently. You have the knowledge now. You have the language. You have the framework. 10 disciplines. 1 operating system. A single, non-negotiable commitment to becoming the architect of your own inner world. The only question, and I mean this not as a challenge but as an invitation, is whether you are finally ready to become them. Not perfectly. Not permanently from this moment without struggle or setback or the occasional return to old patterns. But consciously, deliberately, with the understanding that every single time you choose response over reaction, however small the moment, however unwitnessed the choice, you are becoming more of who you actually are. It is not about the destination. It is about the daily decision to keep building. That is the key. That has always been the key. The silent mind is not the empty mind. It is the free one. And you have always had the capacity to build it. You have always had the capacity to live inside it. You simply needed someone to show you that the silence was not emptiness. It was sovereignty. It was clarity. It was the ground beneath your feet that no storm, no person, no outcome, no version of the world going wrong could ever take from you. Go build it. Go live in it. It has been waiting for you the entire time. End of the silent mind. How to stop letting your emotions control you.